The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Titans of Nuclear. I'm Phoebe Lind, and today I am joined by Kaylee Cunningham, a Ph.D. student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who you may also know by her alias on TikTok as Miss Nuclear Energy. Kaylee is a part of our newest series highlighting young and influential leaders in the nuclear energy industry. Kaylee, welcome to Titans of Nuclear.
Thank you so much for having me, Phoebe. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually a huge fan of the podcast.
Actually, I mean, doesn't everybody love the show?
Yeah, honestly, I'm pretty sure everyone does.
But yeah, I would love to have you introduce yourself a little bit, kind of give a little bit of your background. We'll dive into it more in depth throughout the episode, but go ahead, floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. So as Phoebe mentioned, my name is Kaylee Cunningham. I am a rising or soon to be second year PhD student at MIT. I'm studying nuclear engineering, and my concentration is, or field of specialization as we call it, is in material science. So specifically, I look at like how different materials change as a result of being exposed to radiation. And I did my undergrad at the University of Florida, so go Gators, subtle shout out there, or maybe not so subtle. I love TikTok, I love social media and advocacy, and I'm just excited to be here.
Amazing, we're excited to have you. So tell us a little bit more about your background. So University of Florida, I know you have a research reactor there. Where did you grow up? How did you come into nuclear energy, nuclear in general?
So yeah, growing up, I actually am from the Massachusetts area originally. I lived in Melrose until I was about 11 when I moved to North Carolina. I lived there for about 3 years, and then I moved to Florida, did high school there, and then went to the University of Florida for undergrad. And when I was in high school, I always have to bring up my engineering teacher, Miss Nimi Arunachalam. She was my inspiration. I honestly would not be the woman that I am today had I not had her as a teacher. She kind of encouraged me to join my school's engineering academy. It was sort of a magnet school with these different programs and different tracks. And I actually started off in the fashion and design academy. And I was super interested in musical theater and trying to pursue that. But I also loved calc and physics. And so I had a couple friends bring me to go meet Miss Nimi. And ever since then, I was in love, and I knew engineering was the career for me. And I feel like a lot of students are in that position, especially this time of year, right? We're getting into the start of college, freshmen are coming in, trying to decide what they want to major in. And a lot of people have a general census of, okay, STEM, not STEM kind of thing. But one of the, I guess, most crucial moments for me selecting the nuclear industry was a competition I did in high school. My friends cringe when I bring it up because I talked about it way too often when I was younger. But I was involved in the Florida Student Astronaut Challenge. So it was a competition where me and a group of friends ended up volunteering our time after school every day until like 5 or 6 p.m. studying things about like aerospace and the space shuttle. And we would go to this competition at Kennedy Space Center, and we would first we would go through a space shuttle simulator, right? So like flying the space shuttle and going on a mission and all of that stuff. But then we had an engineering challenge and a lab research-based challenge, which I now look back and realize it was basically a qualifying exam for a PhD. I willingly put myself through that, and now I'm like, what was wrong with me? But it was just such an incredible experience. And the first year I did it, my sophomore year of high school, the seniors on the team picked the project, and it was focused on, for this lab research experiment proposal, it was focused on figuring out a way to protect astronauts and keep them safe for a NASA mission. And the project the seniors picked was focused on radiation shielding for those astronauts. And this was the first I had heard about radiation or nuclear or anything like that. And I was just so, I want to say obsessed, borderline obsessed with the topic. And, you know, this kind of idea that radiation is something that can be so hazardous, but at the same time, here on Earth, it's something we use for clean, carbon-free energy. It just blew my mind, the kind of juxtaposition, and that's what sucked me in. And ever since then, I have been diehard on track nuclear.
That's fantastic. I think if I had known about an astronaut program when I was in high school, I'm also from Massachusetts, and I was not aware of any astronaut programs there. So that sounds like a great opportunity. Also going back to your points about having strong mentors and opportunities at a young age, so important to, you know, getting that kind of exposure to new industries that you might not grow up knowing about.
Exactly.
So when you went to college in Florida, then you were absolutely certain you wanted to do nuclear engineering from the get-go?
Yes. So I applied with, it's actually kind of a funny story. I was actually a little undecided between cybersecurity and nuclear engineering, because I also loved computer science. Anyone that knew me in high school didn't know me as the nuclear girl. I was the computer science girl. So this like interest.
You could have been Miss Computer Science instead of Miss Nuclear Energy, but here we are.
Pretty much. But here we are. And kind of how I decided that, I applied to a bunch of different schools, and some were for cybersecurity programs, some were for nuclear engineering programs. And funny enough, I had the best financial offer. I got full scholarships to cover my education at the University of Florida, and that was a nuclear program. So that's what decided it for me. And it honestly, I very much trust that everything happens for a reason and works out the way it's supposed to. And that's exactly what it did, because it was the best decision I ever made, going to the University of Florida. And sometimes I look back, because I did apply to MIT for undergrad and I didn't get in, right? And again, this goes back to all those students out there that are applying or maybe filled out the application, didn't get in, and are kind of upset, stirring with that kind of disappointment. And I was crushed. I was so obnoxiously obsessed with MIT when I was in high school. My heart was just shattered, right? But going into the program at the University of Florida, I wouldn't change it for the world, even if I got into MIT and could go back and do it again, because the faculty, the mentors, the friendships, and just the experiences I had there overall are things that shaped the person that I am today, and really helped me outline and set up my career path so that I can be focused on, you know, going to graduate school, using as many resources as I can. Quick shout out to Professor Jim Bocek and Dr. Michelle Manuel, who kind of mentored me throughout my years at the University of Florida and got me on track to get into MIT. That also shout out to Dr. Jeff Powers, my first Oak Ridge National Lab research mentor, who did literally everything in his power to set me up for success. So having this team of incredible mentors put me on the path to still go to MIT for graduate school. And here I am.
I noticed in one of your recent TikTok videos how you had recommended nuclear engineering specifically because of smaller class sizes and like the access that gives you to not only professors, but other people that you can rely on, right? Did you know that you wanted to go to grad school through undergrad as well? Like you were kind of on that academic pathway?
My freshman year, I had no idea what I was doing. Don't let the Miss Nuclear persona fool you. I was clueless. I applied to every opportunity that, those email blasts that get sent out from the department head to, the entire department, all the undergrads, like, hey, opportunity here. Hey, internship here. I applied to every single one like a crazy person, just because I didn't know what I wanted. And at the end of my freshman year, after I had done a little bit of research that I wasn't totally loving, I had internship offers from Southern Company and Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And the Oak Ridge National Laboratory internship was doing a computational research project for nuclear reactor fuel. So at the end of my freshman year, I didn't know anything about nuclear. I couldn't tell you what a nuclear reactor was, okay? But I had the computer science skills. So that's the path that I chose. And it ended up being a more research instead of industry-based job. And I absolutely loved what I was doing. And that set me up kind of on the trajectory to work in academia. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean going to graduate school, pursuing your PhD means you're isolated from industry. It's actually quite the opposite nowadays. Mm-hmm. Pushing towards something that I've realized, pushing towards these advanced reactors that we are trying to develop and deploy as soon as possible. The PhD kind of academia route, that sort of expertise is so crucial to these advanced reactors we are trying to build and deploy as soon as we can. And because of that, I actually interned at BWXT last summer. So for those of you who don't know, BWXT builds and manufactures all the nuclear reactors for the Navy, but they also about 5 or 6 years ago started an advanced technologies kind of research and development branch. And in this branch, I got the best of both worlds. So I was doing research, but it was pushed at the industry kind of fast pace that I think really feeds me and fills me up. And I just absolutely loved the environment. So it's incredible to know that if I don't want to go into academia, even with a PhD, I can still go work in the fast-paced industry.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's a pretty common misconception across all disciplines, not just nuclear engineering as well. But yeah, turning to that, tell us a little bit more about your work in your PhD. What are you studying? What are your focuses right now?
So this is actually kind of a fun discussion. So I am in the process of switching projects right now. So that's a little flag out there for anybody who's working on something they don't like. You don't have to keep working on it. Of course, give it a shot. I spent a year working on this and decided, okay, no, I really don't like this. So I switched to something that I enjoy more. But for context, I mentioned before, my focus is understanding the materials and the material science behind radionuclides, radioactive materials, or materials that are damaged by radiation. So the project I started on was for Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They're funding this research project with MIT. There's this huge push to get a commercialized fusion deployment sometime within the next decade, 2 decades. I don't know CFS's timeline, but the project that I was focused on was studying the structural materials for fusion reactors. So trying to understand how in a fusion reactor, when we have insanely energetic neutrons, like way more energetic than your standard fission neutrons that we already kind of understand, these super energetic neutrons are smacking into different materials that are holding this sort of plasma suspension system. So basically, pulling the technical information out of it, all you need to know is we've got really excited neutrons smacking into materials and causing all kinds of problems. So my job was to figure out how to mitigate those problems and make sure that our materials are strong and structurally safe. And that involved a lot of what they call microscopy work. So looking at super, super tiny samples, like on the scale of nanometers, like microns in size, nanometers for specific particles or defects we're looking at, which is on the scale of like the size of a human hair, very, very tiny. Looking at that under a very powerful microscope is just not something that I enjoyed long term. So more recently, I am in the process of switching to a fission-based project, understanding how what they call particle form fuels work and how the materials behind that work when you have different fuel types within these particle forms. So backing that up again for those non-technical people listening, I think of it like an M&M cookie, okay? So within this cookie, we've got tons of M&Ms, right? Inside an M&M, you've got your chocolate center, and then you've got this hard candy shell surrounding it, and then a color coating surrounding it, and then a little M&M stamp, lots of layers surrounding that chocolate. So if you think of the chocolate as your nuclear fuel, that's where your uranium sits, then we coat that chocolate with the candy shell, which is going to be different layers of carbon or maybe silicon carbide, different materials to protect that chocolate. And then those little M&M particles go inside the cookie. And that cookie is almost like your matrix is what we call it, where we encompass or encase all these little particles to create what we would refer to as like a standard fuel pellet. So instead of just straight uranium dioxide, we've got little tiny particles of uranium coated in a bunch of stuff to make it safer and embedded into a cookie. So my focus now is looking at and understanding how those different materials work inside the cookie, if that makes sense.
That sounds fantastic. But I gotta be honest, I think what I'm more fascinated by is how you were just able to break down that super complex topic with an analogy about an M&M cookie. But also speaking to that point, I like from what I've seen from, your more public work on TikTok is that in addition to being, a nuclear engineering student, which is very challenging, you're a fantastic educator and being able to take these topics.
Thank you.
Of course. And then, but taking these topics and like really making them accessible to, a more public audience, that's also something I'm super passionate about just because especially in the nuclear energy industry, but also extending that further to other environmental issues, climate change. It's really just like misinformation and a lack of education that I think is what causes a lot of the fear that we have around these newer technologies. So switching gears a little bit to talk about your more public work on TikTok, what inspired you to start posting videos and kind of creating this educational content?
So this is actually a fun story. When I think it was my senior year of undergrad at the University of Florida, I won a scholarship to go on a short-term study abroad to Iceland. So this was like a 10-day kind of quick trip to go study and understand Iceland's geothermal energy and the initiatives that they are taking on and pursuing to decarbonize their entire country by 2030. They have very ambitious goals, but they're actually making huge strides to meet those goals. And part of that is supplementing their geothermal energy with energy alternatives. And they are very extensively exploring solar panels, wind power, and even hydrogen power or synthetic fuels for things like their boats, their fishing economy, that sort of thing. And so being the token nuclear engineer on the trip, I, of course, in all of these lectures and seminars and discussions, had to raise my hand and say, have you thought about nuclear energy or small modular reactors? And the response I got was overwhelmingly negative. One of the first times I asked, the response I got was, quote, "Oh, we don't believe in that. We're a peaceful nation. We don't do that." And I was so surprised. I was like, wait, did I say what? Did I misspeak? But I was just so surprised, and I confirmed I did not misspeak. And that really the kind of emotional buildup from that, being so shocked and frustrated that there still is this stigma behind nuclear energy, inspired me to turn to TikTok. This was like end of the pandemic. TikTok was like just starting to become super popular. And I was a user, but I was never like a content creator. And I was like, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. People need to hear about this. So I made a TikTok, and I was using like the green screen effect, just me talking about, this is me in Iceland. I said, let's talk about nuclear energy. They said, no. What's the deal, you know? And it did very well. I think it got something like 10,000 or 20,000 views. And it was the first video I ever posted. And I was so overwhelmed by that response, and just so grateful, and recognized that there is a very serious need for more educational resources about the nuclear energy industry. And because of that, I started making video replies responding to questions I had in the comments on that video. And those video replies did even better than the first video. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And that was 2 years ago, and almost exactly 2 years ago. And now here I am, Miss Nuclear Energy.
I can't imagine like the roller coaster of emotions that came with that, from like the rejection that of nuclear energy that you saw in Iceland to the, I'm hoping, more positive response that you received on TikTok. I also think, or my idea is that, you know, being a more public figure talking about a controversial topic, I'm sure you're very used to kind of responding to criticism and explaining away the controversy of some of these issues. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you face in kind of overcoming that stigma on your platform?
That's a great question. I think one of the most common questions I get, or sort of misconceptions or misunderstandings, is about the waste. People are still fixated on Homer Simpson and the green glowing slime and Halloween. And, you know, I just recently, I was at modeling and experimentation validation school, very wordy, but at the Idaho National Laboratory. And we toured the Experimental Breeder 1 museum. And so those of you who don't know, it's just a fancy nuclear reactor museum. The first nuclear reactor to produce like X amount of electricity in the United States. And when we were touring the museum, there was like a model fuel bundle from the reactor core on display. And so I said, okay, everybody needs to stop what we're doing. I need to make a video. And I had someone film me saying, this is what nuclear waste looks like. Metal rods, not green glowing slime. And every time I make a video like that, it always gets so much attention and so much traction, because people still don't know that we're not talking about slime. Nobody's glowing green. We do have glowing blue Cherenkov radiation during the reactor being pulsed, but you know, we don't see this kind of stigma that's been portrayed on the media. So that's definitely an obstacle. And of course, I receive my fair share of hate comments and criticisms and everything else. And, you know, sometimes people question if I'm actually even a PhD student. Does she actually go to MIT? Which I promise I do. Go to my website, go to my research group's website. I'm there. So it is, it's just, it can be difficult, but I think the most important thing is to keep responding to these genuine questions, because all of that kind of negativity and hate and mistrust stems from fear and hurt. A lot of people have seen these tragic nuclear accidents like Chernobyl, like Fukushima, and are absolutely terrified because they don't understand what happened, why it happened, and are concerned it could happen again. And those are all very valid fears and valid concerns. And so what I'm trying to do on the platform is to just give them the technical perspective in a way that hopefully they can understand a little bit better, and use that to maybe help ease some of the anxiety and mitigate those fears.
That's, I mean, that's such a kind way to respond to that. Like the fact that you have so much empathy for people coming from all different perspectives, I think is so incredible. Kind of in the face of some of those challenges as well, what keeps you going and like continuing to post and continuing to do what you're doing in a public forum? What motivates you to be an advocate for nuclear energy, both on TikTok and as a student as well?
So about every 1 to 2 weeks, I get a message or two from high school students, predominantly high school females, that are asking questions and wondering, how can I do this? How do I study nuclear engineering? What college programs are out there? Students that are maybe curious, but a little bit afraid, and have started to look up to me as sort of a role model. That is hearing those words and that sort of being able to answer those questions and hop on a Zoom call. It takes an hour. That's it, an hour once a week to hop on a Zoom call with a high school student and talk about my experiences, the opportunities available in the industry, and the things that you can do in the field is probably the thing that fills me up the most and motivates me to keep going. Knowing that there are however many, a few hundred high school females that have been following me religiously and looking to me for advice on what college do I go to, and is it okay if I haven't taken calculus? Can I still do this if I went to community college? Asking these sorts of questions is, so important. And there's not really anybody out there that are answering these questions. And so being able to respond to them and essentially provide the mentorship and resources that those 3 mentors that I listed, actually 4 mentors, can't forget about Miss Mimi, being able to provide that mentorship and those resources that were provided to me is kind of like my way of passing the torch and being able to give back. And it's what makes me feel good and what motivates me to keep doing this.
That's fantastic. Have you ever thought about how like your work as an educator on TikTok has influenced your studies, or how those two kind of work together to make you both a better student and a better educator? Like, do you find your work in TikTok like coming into your studies at all?
Yeah, I think it depends on, I've been fluctuating between these 2 research projects, and I think being on TikTok and being so tapped into not just my nitty-gritty, super technical research topic, but also being tapped into the bigger picture, the nuclear energy industry as a whole, the economic side of things, the policy side of things, the regulatory side of things, and getting asked questions about those things kind of forces me to stay up to date, to keep reading the news, keep reading journal articles, and pay attention to what's going on in the world. And I think that brings a sort of awareness and well-roundedness to the table that I wouldn't otherwise have if I wasn't doing TikTok. That being said, I think sometimes my research does fuel some videos that I may be making. Like there are videos I've made where I'm just like in the lab waiting for an experiment to finish up, and I'm like, hey, so this is what I'm doing. And that can be fun and kind of entertaining. And then I've also had different videos or things that I've made pertaining to the big picture of my research projects, looking at what the future of fusion may look like versus looking at what now switching projects, this advanced nuclear might look like in the future. So I think they kind of feed into each other and help build me up and support me as a more well-rounded academic and researcher.
Do you ever get recognized on campus or just like out in public as Miss Nuclear Energy?
I actually do sometimes, and sometimes I wonder if it's just because I'm at MIT surrounded by this incredibly technical community. But it was so funny when I first started in my lab group last year. I was sitting at my desk, and one day an undergrad student comes in and starts like smacking the postdoc that I sit with and like poking him like, oh my God, that's her. Is that Miss Nuclear Energy from TikTok? That's the TikTok girl. And Angus, my postdoc mentor, was like, I don't know, maybe I'm not on TikTok. I don't know. Go talk to her. It's just Kaylee. And it was so funny. And he was too shy to say anything. So then my mentor came to me later and was like, hey, do you run like a social media thing? Like, what's going on? And I was like, oh my God, yes, that's me. And I went and talked to the undergrad, and I was like, hey, if you need anything, let me know. We're just peers, same lab group, so it was funny. And sometimes it's a little, makes my cheeks turn red, but it's very cool.
Do you find that, speaking of like the undergrad and the postdoc, do you find that there's a divide in how different generations respond to your content on TikTok?
Oh, absolutely.
I think your points on like, it's just hot rocks and then it's just spicy rocks, I find it so funny. But I can only imagine how like an environmentalist who is brought up to think that nuclear energy is like super scary would like really hate us referring to fuel rods as like spicy rocks.
That's it. Yeah. No, and I think something I try and communicate in my videos, or at least in comment sections or captions, is like, my target audience is not the technical people, right? I get a lot of, you're oversimplifying this. This is not all the information. And I'm like, okay, yes, obviously saying a nuclear reactor is spicy hot rocks that boil water is an oversimplification. But the point is, sometimes to communicate to people who don't have a technical background, you need to simplify. That's kind of the entire point, right? But I have found that a lot of the graduate students that I have interacted with are just not on TikTok, not really on, especially at MIT, or not really even on social media. And I think that's more of a generational thing. A lot of the graduate students in my cohort are a lot older than I am. So I went straight from my undergrad to grad school. I'm only 23, and a lot of my cohort went and worked in industry for a few years or got a master's first, and have a little bit older peers and are a little bit more mature and don't really engage in, or maybe fully understand, the internet and TikTok and Gen Z and all of that stuff. So I very much on TikTok try to tailor my content to Gen Z, because they're the ones predominantly using the application. And I don't know if anybody's told you this, but they're the ones that are going to be running the world in a couple of years. So getting as many of them engaged in the nuclear industry is probably the most important thing I can be doing, and another motivator for making content and using TikTok as a platform specifically.
I mean, I can definitely see the reach that it has. I'm also in my 20s. You ever find that there's like a stigma from some of your older classmates, or like older folks who are in your program, against TikTok? And then on a more positive note, how do you explain like the positive benefit that it does have?
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, first off, there's always people concerned about security, right? There was the whole congressional bill and concerns about TikTok not being the most secure application. But my perspective and my response is always, I'm not sharing any information that is not already out on the internet, so if people can go find it on their own, the nefarious people are going to go find it, right? I'm trying to bring content to people who, specifically younger people, who maybe would not have searched for it on their own. And that's kind of the point of doing goofy dances, making memes, making cheeky PG-13 rated jokes, and doing these kind of unprofessional things to kind of humanize the nuclear industry as a workforce development tact. And I do occasionally get, a little bit of outside of the security concern, oh, is that really serious though? And is that really something you want to be doing and putting yourself out there like that and everything else? Aren't you scared of being wrong or saying something incorrect? And my response is always, I'm human. You're human. We are all human. We make mistakes. The important thing is that we own up to our mistakes and correct them. Right? That is something that I think builds trust within the social network and within that sort of community. And again, I always point toward, when it comes to me being unprofessional, quote unquote, on social media, I always point toward the workforce development problem we are seeing in our industry. I heard some crazy statistic that I'm not going to quote here because I don't remember off the top of my head, but a very, very large percentage of the workforce is retiring in the next 10 to 20 years. And a very, very small percentage of the workforce is entering, or are students entering the workforce within the next 10 to 20 years. So we do have this massive gap between these two that we need to fill. And that's the nuclear industry without all the advanced reactor deployment. If we actually see small modular reactors take off, or advanced reactors take off, micro reactors, then we need people to build the plants, to design the plants, to construct the plants, to operate the plants. And we don't have that. And that's a problem. Making strides to influence and inspire young people to pursue the nuclear industry, even if they don't want to study nuclear engineering, even if they're looking at mechanical engineering or civil engineering, or even if they're not even an engineer, right? We need people in policy. We need people in advocacy. We need people in planning and urban planning and city planning and siting regulations. The list goes on and on. So inspiring people to pursue nuclear and kind of opening up that door, or introducing it as an industry you can go work in, is the most crucial thing we need to be doing. And most of the time when I respond with that, people's opinions start to change, the gears start to turn in their head, and they say, wait, can I be in a TikTok?
A TikTok, or something even way beyond that, designing your own nuclear plants or running them. World is your oyster, truly, in this generation.
Absolutely.
But all that said, what advice would you give to someone who would be looking to enter the nuclear energy industry?
I would tell them to network, network, network. The nuclear industry is one of the most incredibly tight-knit communities I have ever witnessed. Literally, like every other day, I meet someone in the industry who knows someone who met me at this time. Like, the connections are just so crazy because it is such a small field right now. And because it's such a small field, but the demand for jobs is skyrocketing. Every single day, it's getting higher and higher. And because of that, if you're able to make just one connection to somebody in the nuclear industry, you're basically connected to the entire industry. And with that, then you're able to kind of pull on those connections to find a job that you genuinely enjoy. Like going back to the projects that I'm working on for my PhD, I just personally didn't like the project I was working on and the experiments I was doing. So I pulled on one of my connections and an old mentor to say, hey, what kind of projects do you have available? What's going on here? And started poking around and found the project that is basically my dream thesis. And now it's mine and my future thesis. So number one is network, network, network. And number two is to be kind to yourself, show yourself grace, especially if you're studying nuclear engineering or any sort of STEM field, really anything as a whole. We have a tendency to kind of work too much and tend to be on the workaholic side in this industry. And it is so, so important to remember to take care of yourself, to eat right, to exercise. I always like to say, do something for your mind, body, and soul every single day. Like, take care of yourself, because yes, climate change is important, but your health comes first.
I certainly need that reminder too sometimes. And to your point about like the tight-knit network of nuclear as well, we're based in Washington, D.C. And it's funny, you go to literally any nuclear related event, and 90% of the people here have been a guest on Titans of Nuclear. Yeah. And it's like wonderful that we're building this community and we're all so passionate about, moving the industry forward overall. But there's also so many different technologies, and we're all so excited about like those moving forward. And I would love to, so sorry to interrupt, but I would love to add on to that. People in the nuclear industry are so positive and like so helpful. Like, I have never met anyone who is not willing to help with like, hey, can you help me track down this sample? Or, hey, do you have these resources? Or, hey, I'm just interested in doing this. Can you tell me more about what you do? Everybody is always willing to drop anything to help a student. And that is something I think is very unique to the nuclear industry. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had a ton of experience on the academic side, but I very much welcome that interruption. But on that point, what are you most excited about in the industry over the next 5 to 10 years? I want to see some small modular reactors built. That I am here to see them constructed. NuScale got their design license done. I don't know if it was the design or the siting license, but NuScale is like on the way. They are leading the charge with these SMRs, and I want to see one built. That's what I'm most excited about. I imagine you will have a lot of people on this podcast agreeing with you on that point. Okay. All of that to wrap up, and even more topics that you cover on your TikTok. Where can our audience find you for more informational videos? Well, first you can go to my website. It's just KayleeCunningham.com. And that has links to my TikTok, to my other social media pages, my research, any of my publications, all of that fun stuff. So that's the best place. Fantastic. Any final thoughts for our audience before we say goodbye? Just look towards the nuclear energy industry. If you're thinking about a career in nuclear, go for it. Take the leap, because you will not regret it. Amazing. Some great final words from our guests today. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.